For the last 15 months, we've been living online. Just look at this event this evening, virtual. The online world has become our world, for better or for worse. It is where many of us are working. It is where we stay in touch with friends and family, buy our groceries, find out what is happening in our community and the wider world. It is where we engage in debate. It has become another public square. That public square should be a safe space, a place where all Canadians can engage without fear, while remaining true to the many identities that make our country what it is. Unfortunately, our online public space is not always a safe space. Il y a des individus qui profitent de l'anonymat de leur écran pour diffuser des propos haineux. Cette haine atteint de nombreuses personnes rapidement et déborde parfois dans le monde physique, où son impact est dévastateur pour des vraies personnes et des communautés. Nous devons combattre cette haine, et ceux qui la produisent doivent être tenus responsables. Nous savons que le racisme et la haine existent dans nos pays. Nous pleurons encore le meurtre tragique de la famille Afzal à London, Ontario, visés parce qu'ils étaient musulmans. Nous nous souvenons des victimes. Nous nous souvenons des victimes de l'attentat de la mosquée de Québec. Hate and vilification are realities for Indigenous people, Asian, Jewish, and Black Canadians, LGBTQ2 people, and people with disabilities. And some of the worst examples of hate are visible online, in that virtual public space. Dans les dernières années, plusieurs communautés nous ont dit que la haine en ligne était une partie trop fréquente de leur quotidien. À tous ceux qui ont pris le temps de partager leur histoire et de militer pour un changement, nous vous remercions. Nous vous avons entendu et nous allons continuer de vous écouter. Et nous devons agir. La lutte contre la haine en ligne n'est pas une tâche facile. Elle exige la collaboration et une solution multifacette. Le gouvernement, le secteur privé et tous les Canadiens ont un rôle à jouer. Mes collègues parleront sous peu de l'important travail qu'ils accomplissent sur la haine en ligne. Je commencerai par le projet de loi déposé à la Chambre plus tôt cet après-midi. Bill C-36 proposes amendments to the Criminal Code, the Canadian Human Rights Act, and the Youth Criminal Justice Act to address hate speech and hate crimes. These changes are designed to target the most egregious and clear forms of hate speech that can lead to discrimination and violence. They do not target simple expressions of dislike or disdain that pepper everyday discourse, especially online. Le projet de loi C-36 permet de meilleurs recours pour les victimes de discours haineux et assure que ceux qui créent ces derniers soient tenus responsables selon la loi. Pour ce faire, nous proposons des changements précis à la loi existante. First, this bill would amend the Canadian Human Rights Act to define a new discriminatory practice of communicating hate speech online, and to improve the complaints process available to victims of online hate speech. These changes would give anyone in Canada the ability to take action if they encounter hate speech online by filing a formal complaint to the Canadian Human Rights Commission. This is a change long called for by advocates and restores an important civil remedy for victims of hate speech. The bill defines hate speech as content of a communication that expresses detestation or vilification of an individual or group of individuals on the basis of a prohibited ground of discrimination. This definition is grounded in Supreme Court of Canada decisions. The second element of this bill amends the Criminal Code to improve the prosecution and prevention of hate crimes. C-36 formally defines hatred in the Criminal Code in line with Supreme Court of Canada decisions. The bill would also establish a tool for those who fear, on reasonable grounds, that another person will commit a hate crime or hate propaganda offense. These individuals would be able to seek a court-ordered peace bond with the consent of the Attorney General to prevent those crimes from occurring. Hate speech directly contradicts the values underlying freedom of expression and our Charter of Rights. It threatens the safety and well-being of its targets. It silences and intimidates, especially when the target is a vulnerable person or community. When hate speech spreads, its victims lose their freedom to participate in civil society online. La haine en ligne est une réalité. Nous devons y faire face d'une manière qui renforce notre vision du Canada comme un pays pacifique, inclusif et démocratique. Tous les Canadiens méritent de se sentir en sécurité et protégés, et ce, dans tous les espaces qu'ils habitent. C36 is an important first step in making our online public square as safe as the public squares in which we walk every day. Thank you. Merci.
Merci, Ministre. I will now turn to Minister Guilbeault to say a few words. Ministre Guilbeault, à vous la parole.
Merci beaucoup. Bonsoir. Good evening. I am joining you from Montreal on the traditional territory of the Mohawk and other Haudenosaunee people. Like more and more Canadians, I am deeply concerned about the incitement to violence and hate speech we see on social media on a daily basis. And I'm even more concerned about their tragic impacts on the lives of our families, children, and communities. The bill just introduced by my colleague David Lametti, Minister of Justice and Attorney General of Canada, is an important step towards creating a safe and inclusive online environment. An environment that protects everyone from hate crime, while also providing Canadians with more opportunities for debate and community building. Avec les modifications législatives proposées aujourd'hui, nous franchissons une étape importante. Nous créons une base solide sur laquelle nous allons pouvoir asseoir notre future législation sur les contenus préjudiciables en ligne. Au Canada, plus de 9 adultes sur 10 utilisent au moins une plateforme numérique. Une proportion similaire a révélé dans un récent sondage être préoccupée par la haine qui prolifère en ligne. La haine, l'incitation à la violence et les contenus illégaux qui sont normalement sanctionnés dans l'espace public sont devenus banals sur les plateformes de médias sociaux. Les statistiques, sans surprise, nous montrent que les groupes racisés sont 3 fois plus susceptibles d'être la cible de violences sur les réseaux sociaux, et ce phénomène s'est accéléré pendant la pandémie. L'attentat meurtrier au Centre islamique culturel de Québec en 2017 est encore frais dans nos mémoires. We can think about those whose lives have been destroyed by online hate and abuse. The consequences can be deadly. Plusieurs plateformes ont pris certaines mesures pour s'attaquer aux contenus préjudiciables, dont la haine en ligne. Il faut toutefois souligner qu'elles prennent leurs décisions de réglementation unilatéralement. Elles ne sont pas redevables au public, seulement à leurs actionnaires. Il n'y a pas de transparence par rapport aux décisions qu'elles prennent. L'autoréglementation n'est tout simplement pas suffisante. Self-regulation is not enough. This is why our government made a commitment to introducing legislation with a specific goal, to create a more inclusive and safer online environment by default. Legislation would make digital platforms even more accountable and transparent with respect to the harmful content they manage, allowed to be posted, and should be removed. This is a delicate, complex, and important task. Over the past year and a half, we held more than 140 targeted discussions with civil society organizations, researchers, victims of online harms, as well as international partners and digital platforms. They have suggested ways to strike the right balance. We will soon publish a technical paper setting out the details of the future law, including its scope and how it would work in practice. Online harms impact all Canadians. We want to engage with Canadians on this detailed proposal and give them an opportunity to express their views. This step is essential to ensure any future law is effective, balanced, and equitable. Les internautes au Canada souhaitent bénéficier des opportunités qu'offre un environnement en ligne inclusif, sécuritaire et ouvert, et où s'exprime une grande diversité de voix. En tirer pleinement avantage nécessitera que chacun, individu comme plateforme, fasse preuve de responsabilité. La liberté d'expression et la sécurité sont des droits inaliénables. Nous ne sacrifierons ni l'un ni l'autre. We can't afford losing precious perspectives and point of views because of online hate anymore. If this pandemic has taught us one thing, it's that we need everyone's creativity, help, and experiences in order to thrive as a society. Merci. Thank you.
Merci, Minister Guilbeault. I will now ask Minister Blair to say a few words. Minister Blair, over to you.
Merci. Bonsoir à tous. Good evening, everyone. I'm very pleased to be speaking to you today from my home, which is located in the traditional territory of the Mississauga of the Credit. The proposed legislation that we have introduced today will help to protect Canadians from hate speech and from hate crimes online. And very importantly, it sets an important stage for additional legislation that we intend to introduce in the fall to further combat harmful online content. That legislation will be informed by further public engagement that will give Canadians and stakeholders a chance to comment on the proposed regulatory framework. That framework will create new rules on how social media platforms and other online services address certain kinds of harmful content while protecting the fundamental freedoms and human rights that all Canadians are entitled to. Specifically, the harmful online content that we are looking to address includes terrorist content, extremist contents that incites people to violence, and child sexual exploitation. We are working with the digital industry and our close international partners to reduce the impact of terrorist and violent extremist content online. And for example, Canada is a signatory to the Christchurch Call for Action, named after the New Zealand city where 51 Muslim worshippers were killed in mass shootings at mosques in March of 2019. The call includes commitments for governments and social media platforms to address terrorist and violent extremist activity online. And as part of the Global Internet Forum to Counter Terrorism, we are also working with our allies and with social media platforms to reduce the availability of ideologically motivated violent extremist content, to improve how industry and government respond to the viral spread of harmful violent extremist content online, and to provide avenues to intervene with those at high risk of radicalizing to violence. Similarly, we continue to work closely with our international allies and our partners to find solutions to better protect children and youth from online sexual exploitation. Last year, Canada and its Five Eyes partners launched the voluntary principles to counter online child exploitation and abuse. And these voluntary principles are a guide for industry on how to counter the scourge that occurs on their platforms. Here at home, we're providing ongoing financial support for cybertip.ca, a national tip line where Canadians can report suspected cases of online child sexual exploitation. And in recent years, we've also announced significant investments to help our police services equip themselves with the tools and the resources that they need to combat these very serious crimes. Online sexual child exploitation continues to be a widespread problem, victimizing vulnerable young people here in Canada and around the world. And terrorists and violent extremists of all stripes continue to use the internet to spread intolerance and hate, to radicalize others and to recruit new followers, and to plan their attacks. On far too many occasions, we've seen the tragic results of these dangerous and despicable activities on Canadian soil. We look forward to engaging with Canadians in the days and weeks ahead to seek their views on the substance of our proposed regulatory framework. Only by working together can we make Canada a safer place, both online and offline. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Merci, Minister Blair. I will now invite Minister Monsef to say a few words. Minister Monsef, à vous la parole.
Merci beaucoup. Bonjour, Anin. Salam alaikum. I join you from my home in Peterborough, Kawartha, on Mississauga and Anishinaabe territory, and I thank my colleagues for their good words and their strong action. Everyone deserves to feel safe wherever they are in this great country, online or offline. Sadly, that is just not the case. I'm mindful as the Minister for Women and Gender Equality, as well as the Minister responsible for rolling out the single largest broadband initiative in Canada's history, that with the economic opportunities that are unleashed through greater connectivity, we also have a responsibility to ensure that everyone is safe and feel like they belong. Hate speech is not new, but with the digitization of everything, It's more rampant and it spreads faster. And those who bear the brunt of it are women, they're young, they're gender diverse folks, they're Black, Indigenous, racialized, and they have vulnerabilities that many of us don't see. And when they're targeted, not only are they harmed, but it sends a message to others who identify with the same realities that they do, that they are not safe, that they are not welcome. And the bill that was introduced today in the House of Commons adds another tool to our toolkit to ensure their safety. To the women, LGBTQ2 folks, to the Muslims, Jewish community members, to Black, Indigenous, racialized folks who have taken the time to speak with us, to share their expertise with us, thank you. We have heard you. To the young women, to the hijabi women who have told us that they are fearful for their lives, let alone to express their opinions online or step up and take on leadership responsibilities. We see you, we hear you, and we've got your back. You've told us that the hate that you experience online and others like you experience online vilifies you and it calls into question your humanity. This is not okay. You've told us that the hate that is experienced online instills fear into you, so you stop expressing your opinions because it's not safe anymore. You've told us that you stop participating in public discourse, and you've told us that our democracy is weakened because of this. We understand. You've told us that the silencing effect of this hate is real and that we have an obligation to do something about it. The steps we're taking today is one further piece forward. We've all seen the rape threats, the death threats, the vitriol aimed at women and gender diverse people just for daring to exist on the internet. We know that close to 60% of Canadian women tell us that they've experienced online violence. Parents tell us they're afraid for their children, especially as they spend more time online. And we also know that it's much worse for folks who identify as an equity-seeking group. And we've all seen that what begins online doesn't just remain there. Tragedies in communities across the country have had their roots in the racist, sexist, xenophobic hatred being spread online. This legislation is an important step forward, and I'd like to take this opportunity to thank survivors and their families who've spoken to us, LEAF, the Canadian Women's Foundation, our colleagues at Possibility Seeds, the Canadian Alliance for Sex Work Law Reform, Students for Consent Culture, the Canadian Federation of Students, Québec contre la violence sexuelle, FCM, and of course, my honorable colleague Iqra Khalid and Minister Bardish Chagger for their leadership in their efforts. We have much more work to do, and we are with you every step of the way, as well with our global partners to make sure that every woman, gender diverse person, regardless of their identity, feels safe and feels like they too can contribute to our economy and to our democracy in a meaningful way. Merci.
Merci, Ministre Monsef. I will now invite Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Justice, Arif Virani, to say a few words. Monsieur Virani, à vous la parole.
Thank you, merci beaucoup. Je vous parle de Toronto, c'est le territoire traditionnel des Haudenosaunee, des Huron-Wendat, Anishinaabeg, et plus récemment les Mississauga du New Credit. I'm very grateful for the opportunity to speak today about a subject which for me is both professional and very personal. After Minister Lametti received his mandate letter from the Prime Minister, he asked me to assist him in his work in developing legal remedies for victims of hate speech. I'm thankful to him for placing that confidence in me as his Parliamentary Secretary. In 2020, I set about consulting Canadians on this very issue. I met with more than 70 groups, including over 100 different individuals who represented a very wide range of experiences and opinions. There were community organizations, advocacy groups, marginalized communities, law enforcement officers, prosecutors, defense counsel, victims and academics. They gave me their views on how to address hatred that we are seeing online. And what I heard was a consistent message that doing nothing could not be an option for the government, that the hatred which once appeared in online spaces was now coming to dominate online spaces, particularly during COVID, as many of my colleagues have highlighted. This is well known to all of us. The pandemic has prompted a rise, for example, in anti-Asian hatred that frequently appears online. But the victims of online hate extend far beyond just one group. You've heard about some of them. The victims are Black Canadians who dare to declare that Black lives matter. The victims are Indigenous people on the prairies, subjected to brutal invective for objecting to the killing of Colton Boushie. The victims are women in Toronto fatally targeted by a man with a van who learned about incel online. They are LGBTQ2 Canadians fearful of showing their pride this month in particular. And the victims are Muslims like me. I said at the outset that this is both professional and personal for me. As a human rights lawyer who became a parliamentarian, I've spent my entire adulthood working to pursue equality and combat discrimination. But as a Muslim man married with 2 children, I'm still trying to process what happened to the Afzal family in London a few short weeks ago. That could have been my family of 4 that never returned home from a routine walk that so many of us take during this pandemic, but instead were cut down in an act of Islamophobic rage. And I want to address one thing to those who decry any attempt to take the rules that we already have that apply to hatred in the physical world and apply those same rules to hatred online as some sort of unwarranted intrusion on freedom of expression. I say quite candidly and pointedly that your analysis is actually inverted. I and every parliamentarian champion freedom of expression. It is the lifeblood of our democracy. But if a Muslim or a Jew or a Sikh can't express themselves and their faith in this country by wearing a hijab or a yarmulke or a turban in public for fear of fatal violence, then I would say freedom of expression is under threat in this country. It is under threat from hatred, and our job as a government is to curtail it. That is what this bill will start to do. It will empower Canadians to protect themselves and ultimately to express themselves freely and openly. Thank you. Merci.
Thank you very much. I will now ask the operator to begin the question and answer session.
Thank you. Merci. If you have a question, please press *1 on your device keypad. Si vous désirez poser une question, veuillez s'il vous plaît appuyer sur les touches étoile 1 de votre appareil. You may cancel your question at any time by pressing *2. Vous pouvez à tout moment annuler votre question en appuyant sur les touches étoile 2. And the first question, la première question, David Lametti, Reuters, Ottawa. Please go ahead.
Good evening. You say you're going to be issuing proposals for the social media platforms in the coming weeks and asking Canadians what they think. Do you have a timeline for how long that process of consultation would take?
Perhaps I can take a shot at it, colleagues. Good evening, David. Yes, this conversation we want to have with Canadians, this engagement will take place over the course of the summertime.
Okay, and second question, if I may, given the importance of what you're doing, why do you even need to consult Canadians? I mean, you've been working on these amendments for months and months. Why not just say, boom, here's what we're going to do, and just put it in the overall amendment as opposed to asking Canadians what they think?
Again, we think it's important. I mean, as Arif has said, as I've said as well, him and the team at Justice, as well as us at Canadian Heritage, Mariam, Bill, we've all engaged with organizations over the course of the last year, more than a year, in fact, with many different types of organizations. And in our conversations with many different governments around the planet, well, actually many, there are only a few governments that have done that. But yesterday I was talking to Germany's justice minister. We've had conversation with Australia. There are a few countries that have done that. All of them have told us that they have consulted their public on specific elements they wanted to bring forward. So as Miriam aptly described, we've heard many things from many different groups, from many different organizations. what we want to do over the course of the summertime is go back to these organizations and to Canadians at large and say, this is what we want to do. What do you think about it? So it's going to be very targeted in terms of the content. It's very specific. It's not a broad, can you give us your ideas? We're actually coming back to these people with very specific ideas.
David, if I might add to what Minister Guilbeault has just said, the problem is complex, the solutions are complex, and the problem is pervasive online and offline. And so all of this requires a number of different balances to be made in a number of different places. So, what we're doing today as a first step involves changing a criminal code definitions and reinstituting a right under the Canadian Human Rights Act, a right to recourse against the authors of hate online. But as Minister Guilbeault has said, there are other solutions that will reside in the regulation of online platforms. There will be things that pertain to the ministry of Minister Blair with respect to police forces and etc. And all of it has to fit together, and we have to try to affect a number of different delegate balances, all to protect this public space that we feel is critically important to the vitality of our democracy and the ability of our people of all identities within Canada to participate in.
Thank you. Merci. The next question, la prochaine question, Tom Korski, Blacklock's reporter. Please go ahead. La parole est à vous.
Thank you very much. Mr. Lametti, why are you suing Parliament?
Sorry, would you repeat the question, please? I missed the fourth word roughly.
Oh, I beg your pardon. Why are you suing Parliament?
Oh, okay. If I have it correctly, I believe you're referring to a proceeding that PHAC has initiated under the Evidence Act, under Section 38. That act says that anybody who is compelled through a procedure to divulge information which is potentially injurious to national security has, and it's a mandatory duty, has a duty to turn that over to the Attorney General. PHAC engaged Department of Justice officials on the 20th of June. And those officials put into place a process that exists in the Justice Department in order to evaluate, according to the law, those documents, and to put the federal court on notice with respect to those documents, if they determine that they may very well be injurious to national security. As Attorney General, that decision has been delegated to department officials, as is the normal course. So it is not going to be a decision that is partisan in any way. Those officials are following the law. PHAC is following the law, the Canada Evidence Act, and that matter will proceed. I am comfortable as Attorney General with the procedure, and I'm comfortable with the procedure as it's proceeding without making any determination whatsoever on the content. I will approach this as Attorney General in a nonpartisan manner. I will never play politics with national security.
Well, can I ask you then as a follow-up, Mr. Lametti, Parliamentary Council says they will fight like hell, and I can't think of anything that would be more partisan than an Attorney General and Parliament's lawyer arguing in federal court over compliance with a House order. And you're the first Attorney General in Canadian history to do this. How does that make you feel?
The PHAC is following the law, Section 38 of the Canada Evidence Act, and justice officials are applying that law in a procedure. This isn't the first Section 38. The bill was brought in. The law was brought in under the previous Conservative government. So this is often used in national security matters, and so there is a resident amount of expertise within the Justice Department, and those experts are looking at the document. So there is an attempt here to follow the Canada Evidence Act as the law requires the Attorney General to do once the act has been triggered, and it has been triggered.
Thank you. Merci. The next question, la prochaine question, Hannah Thibodeau, CBC National News. Please go ahead. À vous la parole.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for taking our questions tonight. All of you have mentioned how important this bill is. You've been working on it for some time, as you've mentioned. Why then have you introduced this on the last day of sitting at really the 11th hour?
Colleagues, if I may, thank you for the question. Yeah. Look, as parliamentarians, as ministers, as members of Parliament, we are going to use every single minute of time that we have in the House to advance reforms to the betterment of Canadians. We have, as a government, taken significant actions from the beginning on this. As Parliamentary Secretary Virani pointed out, this is in my mandate letter, and I delegated him through a mandate letter to take this on, and he's done extensive consultations. Minister Guilbeault has done extensive consultations, but our government has called out Islamophobia. Our government's taken actions to dismantle far-right hate groups and recently added organizations to the Canada's list of terrorist entities. We have invested in anti-racism initiatives, $50 million in the fall economic statement. And in Budget 2021, we've proposed to provide $2 million for nonprofit organizations such as places of worship and community centers to enhance their security infrastructure. The digital citizen initiatives. There are plenty of initiatives that we have been undertaking. We have been all working diligently, and that is where we are. The recent events in London, tragically, although they didn't raise new issues, did put this back on the really in the spotlight. The murder of the Afzal family was something that we're all still dealing with, and we heard the cries to say, you know, we know you're moving on this, but we want you to act as quickly as possible. So, you know, to a certain extent, we heard those, but we have been working on this challenge of racism diligently in Canadian society for the past 6 years.
Just a follow-up. You mentioned, and a couple of you have also mentioned this evening, that terrible attack in London. Is there any element of this new bill that, you know, could have prevented that attack, that could have helped prevent that attack, or even anything?
So, colleagues, if I might offer up the first response here, I think if we just step back and try and think objectively, and I'll confess it's a bit hard for me to do so in something that pointed. You know, I was at the vigil on the Tuesday, 2 days after the fact, but we have to think about what possibly can motivate a young man at the age of 20 to decide to weaponize his vehicle and drive it into a family, taking 4 people's lives. Clearly, there is an element of radicalization that must be happening. And then that begs the question, well, where is it happening? How is it happening? We are in a pandemic. Right? As journalists, you know that better than we do. We're all in a pandemic. That's why we're not having a press conference in West Block right now. During a pandemic, it is extremely likely, virtually absolutely likely, that person was radicalized, or his radicalization was at least enhanced online. So we must tackle that online space. And what we've heard from the Canadians I've talked to, the Canadians that Minister Monsef has talked to, Minister Guilbeault has talked to, is that this is one of the most pressing issues that need to be tackled, because what was problematic in the past has only accentuated now. So that is what has compelled us to take action here. Can we draw a straight line? No politician can draw a straight line definitively between events, but we're using the best evidence that we have before us and what we're hearing from those consultations to respond responsibly to what Canadians are asking of us, which is that to curtail this hatred, open up that public square of ideas, and ensure that everyone who wants to belong can belong in this country.
And if I may add just briefly to that, and quite understandably, we cannot comment on the charges that have now been laid with respect to that terrible crime in London, because the matter is before the courts. But let me speak perhaps more generally. The greatest threat to our domestic security is the actions of ideologically motivated violent extremists, and we know where that motivation is being propagated. It's occurring online. We've seen it in previous crimes, in the van attack that took place in Toronto, in the Christchurch attack in New Zealand, in the Quebec mosque attack. There is ample evidence that those individuals, sometimes referred to as lone wolf attackers, often become radicalized, extreme, and then are incited to violence as a direct result of material that they are being exposed to and seeking online. And we believe that there is an opportunity to remove those online harms, to make it far less accessible to those who would be perhaps susceptible to radicalization and extremism, can improve public safety. And it also could create opportunities for us to identify individuals who pose a significant risk to vulnerable populations, racial minorities, to women, to LGBTQ IA plus members in our society, to anyone who might be the targets of this hatred. We see that hatred is inciting people to serious criminal offenses, and we believe that the measures that we undertake through the passing of this legislation and the work that we will continue to do can improve public safety and help us address the proliferation of ideologically motivated violent extremism in our country.
Hannah, if I may add to that, thank you for your question. We have seen that misogyny, racism, homophobia, Islamophobia, anti-Semitism expressed online doesn't just stay there. It spreads online and it spills into real life. We have seen that, and this is why we're taking action.
Thank you. Merci. The next question, la prochaine question, from Colin Frizzy, Global and Mail. Please go ahead. La parole est à vous.
Right. Thank you for doing this. I'm just wondering, with respect to the legislation introduced today, I'm wondering whether any of you really think that tweaking the Canadian Human Rights Commission laws will make a whit of difference to the discourse that's happening, that you're all talking about, that's motivating these attacks. It would take a very patient person to sort of initiate a complaint at the commission and hope that it gets to tribunal in a year or two to remove an offending comment from the internet. So I think there's a huge disconnect between what you say you're pronouncing on what you're trying to fight and what you're actually doing.
Thank you. Thank you for that question. This is the first step. And what I can say is that clarifying the definition of hatred, both in the criminal law and in the CHRA, will be helpful in defining the parameters of the public space and defining the parameters of what is acceptable. We won't catch everything that's awful out there. There's a lot of stuff out there that is absolutely brutal but doesn't reach the standard. But we will identify a lot of things that are unlawful. And that's what we're targeting. The action under Section 13, what was the old Section 13 of the Canadian Human Rights Act, it has been raised by so many different groups in their consultations with us. And Parliamentary Secretary Virani will tell you this himself. But so many different groups raised the fact that this no longer, it was taken out by the Conservative government for very ideological reasons. An analogous provision was subsequently upheld by the Supreme Court of Canada in the Whatcott case as being constitutional. A number of different groups have told us that they wanted that provision back because at least it gave a remedy to individuals to go after the authors of hatred online and get that content removed. Is it the only solution? No. We've pointed to other potential solutions that require a bit more consultation, a bit more fine-tuning. But this is a very necessary first step, and in many ways, the criminal code definition will help define a number of different things moving forward.
And if I may add, I totally agree with what Minister Lametti just said. And if you look at the examples of Germany, for example, or Australia, in fact, when Germany started, they had a voluntary code, and they evolved it into something much more mandatory over the past couple of years, introducing recently the 24-hour takedown, which is in my mandate letter and the mandate letter of other colleagues as well. Australia started with one online harm and have evolved their system over time. So there's no silver bullet for dealing with this. What we're proposing is a multifaceted approach, including what was tabled today in the House of Commons, including the consultations we will be holding over the course of the summertime, including what Minister Blair is working on, Minister Monsef. So we have to use as many tools as possible to deal with this, but there's no silver bullet to deal with this.
And when I might add to that, can I also, if I may also make a point, this is a very important step, but I also want to point out that it's not the first step that our government has taken to tackle online hate, to tackle the scourge of child exploitation online, to deal with ideologically motivated extremism, as the Attorney General mentioned. We've begun the process, and our country has, frankly, among the first in the world, to begin listing ideologically motivated violent extremists, white supremacists, neo-Nazi, anti-Semitic organizations that are promoting hate and also advocating and carrying out acts of violence against vulnerable groups. We've made significant investments in law enforcement and in our national security intelligence agencies in order to help them identify the sources of these hate and to have it removed from online and to deal more effectively with the individuals and the organizations that are responsible for it. But we also recognize the limitations in the legislative and regulatory tools that are available to those agencies responsible for maintaining public safety, and that's why this is a critically important step. It sets the stage for much of the more work that clearly needs to be done. But this isn't our first undertaking on this line. I would point to the very many things that we've been doing within, not just within public safety, of course, but within the justice system, and the important work that's going on in our communities to reach out to vulnerable populations, to actually connect with stakeholders. And I will tell you, in my conversations with various stakeholder groups, people who've been directly impacted by hatred and intolerance in their daily lives and in their sense of security as Canadians. And they want us to do more, but they also want to make sure that those tools are informed by their lived experience. And so that's why the consultation is so important, to listen to people's experience so that we respond appropriately. They want to be safe in their own communities, and they want us to respond appropriately to the hatred that we have seen begun to be far more prevalent in our society. And so we've been undertaking a number of important steps. I'm happy at another time to articulate many of those steps, but I think that it's important to recognize that this is a very important step in the additional work that we know is necessary and that we are undertaking.
And Colin, you've heard from so many of us already, but I'll make three very short points. On Section 13, people who had previously criticized it in the past, 8 or 9 years ago, during my discussions with them, came back and said because of the amount of activity that's going on online and because of its pernicious impact in terms of those real-life consequences that Minister Monsef had highlighted, had said we have to bring it back. That's one point. The second point is that it's not the exact status quo ante. There have been some tweaks that have been made which are important that relate to dealing with things expeditiously and also enhanced penalties where appropriate so that it has a disciplinary effect on people's behavior. And the last piece is just listening to what people have asked for. And they have said quite clearly, we need as many tools as possible, such as what Minister Blair just mentioned. This is one tool among many that we're proposing to put in place. And I think responsibly, given what we've heard. Thank you.
Thank you. Merci. Once again, please press star 1 on your device keypad if you have any question. De nouveau, n'hésitez pas à appuyer sur étoile 1 si vous avez une question. The next question, la prochaine question, Ian Billy, the Globe and Mail. Please go ahead. À vous la parole.
To any of the ministers present, I just want to pursue an issue that was raised earlier. What are Canadians to make of the value of this legislation being introduced on the last day of a parliamentary sitting with an election expected this fall?
Well, thank you for that question. As I said, we value every minute of our time in the House and putting forward legislation. A number of us have continued to put forth legislation right until the end. Bill C-35 was tabled yesterday or the day before, and that's important. Setting out the rights of the disabled people in Canada and benefits for them. We have done a great deal on all of these, on fighting hatred, fighting systemic racism, calling out Islamophobia. We've done a great number of consultations. This bill is the product of that. This is a careful process. Sometimes things take time, but it is simply in the course of events that we are pushing this forward because Canadians have asked us to. In addition to everything we've done, and in addition to everything we're going to do. It was important. It was important for me. I know it was important to Parliamentary Secretary Virani, as well as my colleagues Monsef, Blair, and Guilbeault, that we table this particular part of the package as soon as possible, and we've done that.
As a follow-up, given the go ahead.
I was just going to comment that, although I have great respect for parliamentary processes, I think it is clear for many of us this has been a lifelong body of work that we've dedicated to our lives and ourselves. So it is frankly one of the reasons many of us came to Parliament was to make a difference and to confront and stop intolerance and hatred in our society. It's so contrary to our values and things that all of us believe in very, very strongly. And so we've been working on this, quite frankly, since we all came to Ottawa. This is an important step that we bring forward, and the legislation we introduced also is going to facilitate in many ways that stakeholder engagement that's so important to continue in that work. And so notwithstanding the recess of Parliament today or anything that might happen in the future, we're here to get the job done, and we're focused on getting the work and doing the work, and doing that work means continuing to engage with cross country, and because the work is so important, we're absolutely committed to getting it done.
If I may add, the folks that I represent, the people who are fearful for their lives, need to hear that the government of Canada will be there for them and will do everything it can to protect their safety and security and democratic participation. It's for them.
A follow-up question? Hello?
Yes, go ahead.
Yep. I've got to ask, given the loud and hard to avoid speculation about an election in coming weeks, is this government committed to this bill if there is an election by the end of the summer and the early fall? Is it something you would bring back if Parliament doesn't return in September?
I think it's fair to say that the government is committed to the bill. We've committed a number of different actions. We've succeeded and instituted a number of different measures. This was in my mandate letter. It had, and as I said, I asked Parliamentary Secretary Virani to take on this particular aspect that has led to these two bills quite directly. It also is in the mandate letter of Minister Guilbeault and Minister Blair, and Ministers Monsef and Chagger have also a role in developing the larger package. So we're very much committed to this. We've taken a number of different measures already. This is another step along the way. It is neither the first step nor the last step. It's the first step of criminal code reform, and I should have circumscribed my comments to that when I announced it in that fashion. But this is part of an ongoing package. It demonstrates the commitment to that our government has towards fighting hate online, and creating a safe public space for all Canadians in which they can participate in this ever-increasing important aspect of our society, the online public space. And this is positive. I'm proud to move forward with this legislation and with the support of this group of colleagues and all the work that they've done, in particular Parliamentary Secretary Virani. And I think it's critical that we move forward, as Minister Monsef has said.
And if I can add a few things, Minister Blair was
if I may,
talking about.
The short answer on my end, and I speak for the rural caucus, of course, but of course the women's caucus, we have every intention of passing this bill.
And if I can add, Minister Blair was talking about some of our commitment prior to coming into politics. The last book I published before coming into politics was looking specifically at the role of technology like AI and some of its impacts on our society, more specifically some of the threats to the very foundation of our democracy, and how these technologies can and in fact have been used to manipulate public discourse. The Brexit, the US election. And we're so committed to this, in fact, that we, at the initiative of Canada, we've launched an international coalition of like-minded countries who have decided to start working together on these issues. Germany, France, Australia, Finland, and we're having conversation with a number of other countries who are very interested, because there is, I think, a global realization that self-regulation by these companies on these issues simply doesn't work. We've tried that. We've tried for more than a decade. And what happened on Capitol Hill is probably one of the many examples of why this doesn't work, which is why governments, our government here and governments around the world are saying we need to tackle this. So this is a clear commitment by our government to do this.
And what I would add just very briefly is that you're hearing from 5 of us, but there's an entire caucus behind us. And what I think where we are now, thankfully, is that these issues seem to be becoming a bit less partisan. And I think that's a step in the right direction for Canadians. And in the last 2 weeks, we've seen members who took different positions, including in different governments, apologizing about their stance on particular pieces of legislation. We've seen members who recently denied concepts such as Islamophobia or whether it even could possibly exist, apologizing on the floor of the chamber. That's a step in the right direction where 338 parliamentarians are working towards the same objective. So not only are we committed to it, but hopefully we can actually get the job done confidently with the support of many colleagues.
Operator, I think we have, I'm looking at the time, I think we have time for one short question, please.
Thank you. Merci. The next question is from Murad Hamadi, Logic. Please go ahead. La parole est à vous.
Minister Guilbeault, you've been promising your online harms legislation is coming in the coming weeks for several months now. It's as we've been over today, you haven't tabled it in the House yet, and this is not it. Is this delay to conduct consultations over the summer a reflection of the feedback and the backlash to C10, which obviously you are moving forward with into the Senate, I guess, now?
As I've said earlier, this is a complex, multifaceted piece of legislation, and not just piece of legislation, but legislative undertaking we are doing with many components, and we felt that going back to Canadians with very specific proposal in terms of how we wanted to move forward was the right thing to do, regardless of what happened on C10. I think some people would debate whether or not C10 was that controversial. I can't remember the last time the National Assembly unanimously supported something that the federal government was doing, frankly, and artists from coast to coast to coast, but artistic and cultural organizations. But really, that's not the point. I mean, this is not about C10. This is about making sure we do what's right. We've seen, in fact, governments try to move very quickly on this, and just to have some of the elements of their legislation shot down by their court system. So there is a right balance to find when you want to do this. I don't think we would be doing a great service to Canadians if we didn't get this as right as possible. You can never come up with a perfect piece of legislation, but the best piece of legislation possible, and that's what we will be using the summertime to do.
And as a follow-up, so at the Canada 2020 event a couple of months ago, you said, you answered a lot of questions by saying that they would be left to the new regulator that you have indicated that you are intending to set up via the bill when you do eventually table it. Given that you're now doing consultations over the summer, given that you're leaving a lot of details to a regulator that you have yet to sort of formulate or appoint, and given everything that everyone today on the sort of virtual podium has said about the urgency of this situation, what is a realistic timeline for this new regime to be in place?
Well, as Minister Lametti and Minister Blair and other colleagues have indicated, we've done a number of things already to move on this. The engagement we want to have with Canadians this summer again will be very specific. It'll be about technical elements of what we would be putting forward, so people will have a very good idea of the architecture. I mean, they obviously won't see the bill, but in terms of the architecture and what we're trying to do, they're going to have a very good idea of that, and this will start very soon. In terms of the time it would take to put in place the overall architecture, well, as we've said, elements are already being put forward. Some were tabled today in the House by Minister Lametti. Others were coming. So we will continue to work on this. We will continue to implement elements of this overall strategy as we move forward.
Thank you very much, Minister. That is all the time we have for today. Merci encore d'avoir participé aujourd'hui. A reminder, if you have any follow-up questions, please contact Justice Canada Media Relations at media@justice.gc.ca. Pour rappel, si vous avez des questions complémentaires, veuillez communiquer avec les relations avec les médias au media@justice.gc.ca. Thank you, merci, and good evening.
Thank you very much.